How do you feel about silence? Does it make you feel uneasy? Or are you happy with it, peaceful with it, contented in silence? I can recall way back in the 1970s when my wife and my little family lived in New Zealand. My wife and I took a trip, just the two of us, up the west coast of the North Island. That's north of Auckland. And in those days, that road, that coastal road on the west side, was very quiet. Hardly any other traffic used it. And in half a day's travel, probably no more than 3 or 4 cars passed us in either direction. Eventually we drove into a place called a kauri forest. Now, the New Zealand kauri tree is enormous. It's huge, it's tall. And often the trunk goes up quite a number of feet or yards before even the first branches appear. We drove into the kauri forest and I switched off the motor, pulled to the side of the road and switched off the motor. And there was total silence, except maybe for the car cooling down, the engine. Total silence. No bird calls, no insect calls. And I waited there in the silence, just stood there, enjoying it. And after a very few minutes, my wife said to me, "Oh, Tom, please go. I don't like it. I don't like it in here." What was she afraid of? It took me a long while to realise that what worried her more than anything else was nothing. Silence. Silence. In the 60 years we've been married, yes, 60 years, I've noticed that my darling wife does not like silence. When she gets home, on goes the radio. Or if the radio's not on, the television's on. She makes herself busy all the time. She finds it hard to relax unless she's watching the television or listening to something on the radio or working around the house or in the garden. To sit still and do nothing, which is a form of meditation, is something that my darling wife doesn't do, and most of you probably don't do either. The majority of people cannot stand silence. But what is it in them that can't stand silence? It's something in their mind. And that something in their mind is frightened of silence. Because when that mind isn't working, the chatter isn't there, it's not judging this and evaluating that, and there is silence, there is stillness, that chattering, that ego self, that imagined self, which all of us imagine to be, becomes very frightened that it might be discovered for what it is. Nothing but a made-up thing. A conditioned thing. Conditioned from when we were tiny tots. And so many of us never get to the stage where we realise that that mind, that chatter, that thought, that thinking is not who we are. Sometimes there comes that flash of insight where a person sits still and they realise well, they probably don't realise that's the trouble. They enjoy that moment of complete silence, of being here and in the now. But quickly, the ego mind, the self-image mind, re-establishes itself and the chatter and thought begins again. One of the reasons so many of us can't stand silence is because of this. The imagined self, the ego self, is threatened by it. It doesn't like it at all. That's why you'll often hear people having radios on in their car. The heartbeat music, boom, 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 boom. Anything that will detract and keep them from the silence of where they can look out upon the world without judgment, without evaluation, and see it as it is, and experience it as it is. So many of us are frightened to do that. But once you discover that silence is nothing to be frightened of, and that from the silence, as you look out, this is when peace begins, then you'll start to welcome silence. You won't need the background noise, the background music, the background radio chatter. You'll be quite content to be who you are, as you are, right at this moment. And that is really the truth of what you are. The observer, the witness, the experiencer of your life. So observe it. Don't escape from it. Observe it and be who you are. There's a lot of peace to be found in that.